I just found out there's going to be a Sony announcement on February 26th, and they're looking to announce a Sony A7V along with 2 additional lenses. Unfortunately, those 2 lenses aren't even on my radar at the moment. It's just the A7V that I'm really keen on. The A7 IV has actually been like a workhorse of a camera for me for the past couple years, and there's a couple things I would like changed and updated for the A7V. And for the most part, that's what the video is going to be discussing. So I asked Copilot what the rumored specs are for the Sony A7V, and it fed back that it's going to have a 44 megapixel sensor, 4K at 120 frames per second, enhanced AI autofocusing. The price should be around €3,000, and the expected release date should be March 2025. First of all, the megapixel count. I personally don't actually feel they need to actually increase to 44 megapixels. I would much rather them stick to 33 megapixels and just hone it down a little bit more. And what I mean by that is the rolling shutter on the A7C II, which is what I'm shooting on at the moment, as well as the A7 IV, is actually quite bad. The image quality coming out of it I'm perfectly fine with, but all I'd prefer is they actually just speed up the readout of the sensor, just so we have a bit more of a usable silent shutter and just to eliminate some rolling shutter. But just touching on that 4K 120 spec, it's a funny one for me because I would actually like to have that spec available to me. But if I think back for the past couple of years, there's only a handful of times where I actually utilized 4K 120. I have the A1 and the A7S III, which are both capable of 4K 120. I just don't use that frame rate. For the most part, because I'm doing events, I don't actually know if I need to get slow motion or not. So I actually shoot 4K 60, which is kind of like an in-between. It's a good enough frame rate to capture most general event coverage. And then if I did need to slow down, I have the ability to. If I was to shoot an event at 4K 120, I'll just end up having choppy footage. It would overheat potentially the camera, and I'll just be chewing up way too much storage. So 4K 120 is a nice to have, but it's just not something that I really need. But on that note, what I do need to have is uncropped 4K 60. I'm currently shooting between the A7 IV and the A7S III, and I do find it quite frustrating that when I'm actually shooting an event, if I'm choosing one camera, I'm actually having to make compromises on both sides. If I shoot the A7S III and I do photos and videos, the video is going to be perfectly fine, and if I was to switch over to photos and videos, the framing will remain the same. But then the output of photos is only going to be 12 megapixels. Whereas on the flip side of it, if I'm shooting the A7 IV, I've got much better photo quality and I have the ability for 4K 60. But when I switch between photos and videos, the crop just goes in at 1.5 times and it really throws me off. So having uncropped 4K 60 is going to be way more useful to me than 4K 120. And now the next point of the enhanced AI autofocusing, it's going to be a standard moving forward for all Sony cameras, I'm sure. But admittedly, the autofocus in the A7 IV has been perfectly serviceable to me even today in 2025. I'm not having many major complaints with the autofocus. So at this point, the AI autofocusing will be a welcomed feature, but it's not something I'm complaining about in the A7 IV. And that just lends to the fact that Sony is just so good at autofocus these days. And now finally, the rumored price of €3,000. The A7 IV, when it first came out, was around £2,200, I believe. The rumored €3,000 price is going to convert to about £2,600. So it's going to be slightly more expensive than when the A7 IV first came out. But when you factor in the fact of inflation and the fact that the A7 IV will still probably be sold as new, I kind of suppose that the £2,600 price point kind of makes sense. Although I'm sure for the most of us on the consumer side of things, we don't want the price increases, but I suppose I can understand it from the business perspective. I think at this point it's fairly obvious that Sony's going to give us the new screen mechanism, which allows us the standard tilt and the flip. And this mechanism was first introduced to us on the A7R5. Another feature which I would like, which actually will be so easily implemented into firmware, and that is just to add aspect markers for 9:16. It's available on some cameras, but not all, and I just don't know why. For example, it's not available on the A7S III, but it's available on the FX30 and the FX3. It's also available on my A7C II, but it's not available in the A7 IV. So here in 2025, we're all about capturing content for social media, YouTube, vertical video, horizontal video, vertical video. We do need these features. So they do need to become the standard. But overall, really, there's not much to improve upon the A7 IV. It's actually been a solid camera for the past couple of years. It served me perfectly fine. I have no major complaints with it today. I'm getting through professional work with it at the moment for editorial photo shoots, event coverage, and it's serving me perfectly fine. But bottom line, no one's going to turn their nose up and actually reject any further upgrades. We'll welcome it with open arms. And for that reason, I'm looking forward to seeing what the A7V has to offer based on the fact that I've actually had such a great time with the A7 IV. So let me know down in the comments below what features you're excited for the A7V.